The first thing you notice when your car dies on a back road in the middle of nowhere is the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence you might expect from rolling farmland at dusk, but the heavy, pressing kind that makes you suddenly aware of how alone you are. My Honda Civic had been making that grinding noise for weeks, the one I kept telling myself I'd get looked at soon, but I'd pushed it too far. Now, with the sun hanging low over cornfields that stretched to the horizon, I was stranded. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands still gripping it like I could will the engine back to life. The radio had cut out with everything else, leaving only the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of wind through tall grass. Through my windshield, the road stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that seemed to disappear into the gathering dusk. This is what you get for taking the scenic route, I thought bitterly. I'd left the city that morning with no real destination in mind, just a vague notion that I needed to drive somewhere, anywhere, to clear my head. 3 months since David and I had ended things. 2 weeks since I'd quit my job at the marketing firm. 1 week since I'd realized I had no idea what I was supposed to do next with my life. The GPS apps on my phone had led me down increasingly narrow roads until I'd found myself here, in what felt like the middle of the earth with a dead car and a dying phone battery. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the screen. 1 bar of service, maybe enough to call APA if I was lucky. But as I was scrolling through my contacts, the low rumble of an engine made me look up. Headlights were approaching from the direction I'd come, moving slowly along the darkening road. For a moment, I felt that familiar city instinct. Lock the doors, don't make eye contact, pretend everything's fine. But as the vehicle got closer, I could see it was an older pickup truck, forest green and well-worn, moving at the unhurried pace of someone who belonged to these quiet roads. It slowed as it passed me, then pulled over about 20 feet ahead, hazard lights blinking. I watched through my rearview mirror as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, and even in the fading light, I could see he was around my age, late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was tall and lean, wearing jeans that had seen honest work and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was dark and a little too long, like he'd been putting off a haircut. He walked back toward my car with an easy, unhurried gait, his hands in his pockets. I rolled down my window as he approached. "Having some trouble?" he asked. His voice was deeper than I'd expected, with just a trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. Not quite Southern, but something that spoke of wide-open spaces and unhurried conversations. "Yeah, she just died on me," I said, patting the dashboard. "I was going to call for a tow, but—" I held up my phone, showing the single flickering bar. He nodded, understanding immediately. "Service is pretty spotty out here. Mind if I take a look?" There was something in his manner that put me at ease, a quiet competence that suggested he'd stopped to help stranded motorists before. I popped the hood and got out, grateful for the excuse to stretch my legs. The evening air was cooler than I'd expected, carrying the scent of wild grass and something else I couldn't identify, something clean and earthy. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending a hand. His palm was calloused, warm, and completely enveloped mine when we shook. "Jamie," I replied, and found myself holding his gaze a moment longer than necessary. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the dim light, and there was something gentle about them that contrasted with the ruggedness of his appearance. He moved to the front of the car and leaned over the engine, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who understood how things worked. I stood beside him, trying to be useful but mostly just watching. His forearms were tan and corded with muscle, and I noticed the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders as he reached for different components. "When did it start making noise?" he asked without looking up. "A few weeks ago. Just a grinding sound when I accelerated." He made a thoughtful sound and continued his examination. "Could be the alternator, or maybe the serpentine belt. Hard to say without better light." He straightened up and looked at me. "You got anywhere you need to be tonight?" The question caught me off guard. Did I have anywhere to be? I'd left the city with no real plan, no reservations, no expectations. Just a vague sense that I needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. "Not really," I admitted. "I was just driving." He nodded like that made perfect sense. There's a motel about 15 miles up the road. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. I could give you a ride and we could come back tomorrow with proper tools and daylight. I don't want to impose, I said, though the thought of being stranded here in the dark was becoming less appealing by the minute. No imposition. I was heading that direction anyway. He paused, studying my face. Unless you'd rather wait for a tow. Might be a few hours, though, and they'll charge you highway robbery for a night call. I looked around at the empty road, the growing darkness, the fields that seemed to stretch into infinity. The practical choice was obvious, but something else was pulling at me too. Curiosity, maybe. Or the simple fact that Marcus seemed like the kind of person who stopped to help strangers without expecting anything in return. Okay, I said. Thanks, I really appreciate it. No problem. Let me grab my toolbox first. Might as well see if it's something simple. He walked back to his truck and returned with a well-used metal toolbox that looked like it had seen decades of honest work. He set it down beside my car and opened it, revealing an impressive array of tools, all neatly organized and obviously well-maintained. You know what you're doing, I observed. I run a garage about 20 miles from here, he said, selecting a wrench. Family business. Been working on cars since I was old enough to hold a screwdriver. He bent back over the engine and I found myself studying his profile in the growing darkness. There was something almost sculptural about the line of his jaw, the way the fading light caught on his cheekbones. He had the kind of face that belonged in old photographs of men who built things with their hands, who knew the value of honest work and quiet integrity. Hand me that socket wrench, he asked, pointing to his toolbox. I rummaged through the tools until I found what looked right and passed it to him. Our fingers brushed as he took it, and neither of us moved away immediately. The contact lasted maybe a second longer than necessary, but in that second I felt something electric pass between us. A recognition, maybe, or just the simple human pleasure of unexpected contact. He cleared his throat softly and returned to his work. We fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. He would ask for tools, and I would find them. Sometimes our hands would touch during the exchange, and each time that little spark would fire again. I began to notice other things too, the way he would glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking, how his movements became slightly more careful, more deliberate when I was close, the way he seemed to be taking his time with the diagnosis, as if he wasn't in any hurry to finish. So what brings you out here? He asked after a while. He was bent over the engine, his voice slightly muffled. Most people don't end up on this road by accident. It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding asking myself for weeks. I needed to get away from the city for a while, I said finally. Clear my head, figure some things out. What kind of things? I was quiet for a moment, watching him work. There was something about the growing darkness, the isolation of this place, the gentle competence of this stranger that made honesty feel possible. Everything, I guess. My relationship ended a few months ago. My job, well, let's just say I wasn't happy there. I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life. I paused. So I got in the car this morning and started driving, didn't really have a destination in mind. He straightened up and looked at me, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes that's the best way to travel. No expectations, no disappointments. Is that your philosophy? A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. I don't know about philosophy, but I've found that the best things in life tend to happen when you're not looking for them. There was something in the way he said it, in the way he looked at me, that made my pulse quicken. The air between us seemed to shimmer with possibility, with the kind of tension that comes from two people circling around something neither is quite ready to name. The light was almost gone now, and Marcus had produced a small LED flashlight from his toolbox. In its white glow, the world had contracted to just this small bubble of illumination, this intimacy of shared purpose. The scent of engine oil mingled with wild grass and the clean smell of evening air. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called out, its voice lonely and beautiful. Where were you headed? He asked suddenly. Before the car died, I mean. I considered the question. Where had I been headed? West, vaguely, Toward the mountains, maybe, or the desert, somewhere that felt like possibility instead of obligation. I'm not sure anymore, I said, and realized it was the truth. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the flashlight's harsh glare. Then he turned back to the engine. Try starting her up, he said. I got behind the wheel and turned the key. Nothing. Not even the grinding noise from before, just the impotent click of a dead battery. Battery's drained, he called out. Probably been struggling for a while before it finally gave up. He closed the hood and began putting his tools away. I've got jumper cables, but it's not going to hold a charge for long. You'll need a new alternator. How long does something like that take? Day or two, depending on whether I have the part in stock. Might have to order it. A day or two. The practical part of my mind started making calculations, motel costs, meal expenses, the inconvenience of being stranded. But another part of me, a part I hadn't heard from in a long time, felt something that might have been relief. The motel you mentioned, I said. It's decent? The Pine View? Yeah, it's all right. Clean rooms, good coffee in the morning. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She's been there about 30 years, makes the best blueberry pancakes in 3 counties. The way he described it with genuine affection made it sound like home rather than just a place to sleep. Okay, I said. I guess I don't have much choice. There's always a choice, he said quietly. But sometimes the thing that looks like a problem turns out to be exactly what you needed. He loaded his toolbox back into his truck and I grabbed my overnight bag from the Civic. The night was fully dark now, with stars beginning to appear in the clear sky above us. In the city, I never saw stars like this, sharp and bright and numerous enough to make you feel both insignificant and part of something vast and beautiful. Marcus's truck was as well maintained as his tools. The interior smelled like leather and sawdust, with just a hint of coffee from a travel mug in the cup holder. Classic rock played softly on the radio, and the whole atmosphere was comfortable in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. You're not from around here, he observed as we pulled onto the road. That obvious? The way you looked at the stars. City people always look at the stars like that the first time they see them without light pollution. I settled back into the passenger seat, watching the dark landscape roll by in the headlights. What's it like, living out here? Quiet, simple. You know your neighbors, even if they live 5 miles away. People help each other without being asked. He glanced over at me. It's not for everyone. Some people find it boring. And you? Do you find it boring? Never. There's always something that needs fixing, someone who needs help. And the land, it changes with the seasons, the weather, the time of day. You just have to pay attention. There was something in his voice when he talked about this place, a deep affection, a sense of belonging that I envied. I'd never felt that way about anywhere. The city where I'd spent the last 5 years had always felt temporary, like I was just passing through on my way to somewhere else. But I'd never figured out where that somewhere else was supposed to be. Have you always lived here? I asked. Born and raised, left for college, thought I was going to see the world, make my fortune in some big city, lasted about 2 years before I came back. What brought you back? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. My dad had a heart attack. Someone needed to run the garage. But honestly, I think I was looking for an excuse. City life never felt right to me. Too much noise, too much rushing around, too many people who didn't actually see each other. I thought about my own life in the city, the morning commute where everyone stared at their phones, the apartment building where I didn't know my neighbors' names, the job where I spent 8 hours a day crafting marketing copy for products I didn't believe in. When was the last time someone had really seen me? Do you ever regret it? I asked. Coming back? Sometimes. Usually when I'm lying under some farmer's rusted-out pickup in the middle of winter, wondering why I didn't become an accountant. He smiled. But mostly no. This is home. These are my people. And there's something to be said for knowing your place in the world. The motel appeared ahead of us, a modest collection of single-story buildings arranged around a gravel parking lot. A neon sign announced Pine View Motel, vacancy, and warm light spilled from the windows of the office. It looked exactly like the kind of place you might drive past without noticing, but tonight it felt like salvation. Marcus parked near the office and turned to look at me. In the dim light from the dashboard, his face was all shadows and angles, but his eyes were warm. "Mrs. Patterson will take good care of you," he said, "and I'll come by in the morning, take another look at your car in the daylight." "I really can't thank you enough," I said. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." "Someone would have come along eventually. People around here look out for each other." But I had the sense that wasn't entirely true. That this particular someone stopping at this particular moment was something more than just rural hospitality. That there had been a choice involved, and he had chosen to stop, chosen to help, chosen to spend his evening working on a stranger's car on a dark road. I reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Count on it," he said, and there was something in his voice that made the simple words feel like a promise. I got out of the truck and shouldered my bag, then leaned down to the open passenger window. "Thanks again, Marcus, really. Get some rest, Jamie. Tomorrow we'll get you back on the road." But as I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, I found myself wondering if I wanted to be back on the road. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The motel office was warm and smelled like coffee and pine air freshener. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be exactly as advertised, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, who checked me in with the kind of genuine friendliness that seemed to have gone extinct in most of the world. "Marcus called ahead," she said, sliding a key across the counter. "Said you had car trouble. He's a good boy, that one. Been helping folks around here since he was old enough to hold a wrench." My room was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the surrounding farmland. I set my bag on the dresser and sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to process the day. This morning, I had been Jamie Collins, unemployed marketing executive, recently single, drifting through life without direction or purpose. Now I was Jamie Collins, stranded in rural nowhere, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who seemed too good to be true. I thought about Marcus bent over my car's engine, the competent way his hands moved among the machinery, the small electric thrill I'd felt each time we touched. I thought about the way he'd looked at me in the darkness, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The way his voice had softened when he talked about home, about belonging somewhere. I'd spent so many years in the city, surrounded by millions of people, feeling fundamentally alone. But tonight, stranded with a dead car in the middle of nowhere, I felt more connected to another human being than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment I thought it might be Marcus. But it was David, my ex, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. The message felt like an intrusion, a reminder of a life I was already starting to forget. I turned the phone off and set it on the nightstand. Outside my window, the night was alive with sounds I'd forgotten existed. Insects and nightbirds, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through tall grass. In the city, night was just day without the sun, full of traffic and sirens and the constant hum of human activity. But this was different. This felt like the world breathing. I fell asleep thinking about calloused hands and kind eyes, about the smell of engine oil and wild grass, about the possibility that sometimes the thing that looks like a breakdown might actually be a breakthrough. Woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the sound of birds I couldn't identify. For a moment I was disoriented, expecting to see my apartment walls, to hear the familiar sounds of city traffic. Then I remembered the dead car, the stranger who'd stopped to help, the motel room in the middle of nowhere. The clock on the nightstand read 7:30 a.m. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, probably months. No dreams that I could remember, just deep, restful sleep that left me feeling more refreshed than I'd felt in ages. I showered and dressed, then walked over to the motel office where Mrs. Patterson had promised coffee and those legendary blueberry pancakes. The morning air was crisp and clean, with a quality of light I'd almost forgotten existed. Everything seemed sharper, more vivid, like the world had been washed clean overnight. The dining area was small and homey, with checkered tablecloths and mismatched chairs that somehow worked together perfectly. "Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter, pouring coffee for a couple of truckers who were discussing the weather with the kind of detailed attention that people who work outdoors pay to such things. "Morning, honey," she called out when she saw me. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "Country air will do that. Coffee?" "Please." She poured me a cup from a pot that smelled like heaven, and I settled at a table by the window. Outside, I could see the landscape that had been hidden by darkness the night before. Rolling farmland stretched to the horizon, broken up by stands of trees and the occasional farmhouse. It was beautiful in a way that was completely different from any beauty I was used to. Not dramatic or imposing, but gentle and welcoming, like a place that had been loved for generations. "Marcus said he'd be by around 9, Mrs. Patterson said, setting a plate of pancakes in front of me. These should hold you until then." The pancakes were everything Marcus had promised and more, light and fluffy, studded with fresh blueberries that burst with sweetness on my tongue. I found myself eating slowly, savoring each bite, in no hurry for the meal to end. "How long have you known Marcus?" I asked Mrs. Patterson when she came by to refill my coffee. "Oh, since he was about knee-high to a grasshopper. His daddy used to bring him by the garage when he was just a little thing. Even then, you could tell he had the gift." She smiled. "Some people just understand how things work, you know? They can look at something broken and see exactly what it needs. Marcus is like that with cars, but I think he's like that with people, too." "What do you mean?" "He sees what people need, even when they don't know themselves. Like last year, when old Mr. Henderson's truck broke down during harvest season. Marcus not only fixed it for free, but he organized half the town to help get the corn in before the rain came. Didn't make a big show of it, just saw what needed doing and did it." I thought about the night before, the way Marcus had appeared just when I needed him most, the easy competence with which he'd taken charge of the situation. Had he seen something in me that I didn't even know was there? "He's never married?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Patterson gave me a look that was both knowing and kind. "No, honey, well, let's just say he marches to the beat of his own drummer. Always has. This town isn't always the most understanding place for people who are different, but Marcus is so respected, so helpful to everyone, that people just accept him as he is." There was something in the way she said it, a careful diplomacy that made me wonder if she was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. I felt my heart speed up a little, though I wasn't sure why. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard the rumble of a truck engine outside. Through the window, I watched Marcus climb out of his pickup, moving with the same unhurried grace I'd noticed the night before. He was wearing clean jeans and a blue work shirt that brought out his eyes, and his hair was still damp from a recent shower. Mrs. Patterson caught me staring and smiled. "Better go see what the verdict is on your car." I paid for breakfast and walked outside, feeling oddly nervous. In the bright light of morning, would last night's connection seem like something I'd imagined? Would Marcus be polite, but distant, ready to fix my car and send me on my way? But when he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that made my chest feel tight. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" "Like a baby." Mrs. Patterson's pancakes didn't hurt either. She makes the best breakfast in 3 counties. Ready to see what we're dealing with? We walked over to my car, which looked even more pathetic in daylight than it had the night before. Marcus popped the hood and began his examination, this time with the benefit of good light and fresh eyes. "Just like I thought," he said after a few minutes. "Alternator's shot and the battery's been compensating for too long. I've got both parts back at the shop." "How long will it take?" "Hour or two once I get started." He straightened up and looked at me. "Question is, what do you want to do while I'm working on it?" It was a simple question, but something in his tone suggested he was asking about more than just how I planned to spend the morning. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't really know anything about this area." "I could show you around if you want, after I get your car sorted out. There are some pretty spots not too far from here, unless you're in a hurry to get back on the road." The old me would have been anxious about the delay, worried about getting back to what? My empty apartment? My lack of job prospects? The remnants of a life that hadn't been making me happy anyway? I'm not in a hurry, I heard myself say. I'd like that. Something shifted in his expression, like he'd been hoping for that answer but hadn't quite expected it. Good, he said. Let me get your car loaded up and we'll head over to the shop. Marcus's garage was exactly what I'd expected. A low, concrete building with 3 bays and the kind of lived-in atmosphere that spoke of decades of honest work. Tools hung in precise arrangements on pegboard walls, and the smell of oil and metal and hard work filled the air. It felt like a place where things got fixed instead of thrown away, where problems were solved with skill and patience rather than credit cards and replacement purchases. Family business? I asked, noticing the faded sign that read Garrett and Son Auto Repair. 4 generations, Marcus said, hooking my car up to the tow bar on his truck. My great-grandfather started it back when most of the work was on tractors and farm equipment. My grandfather expanded into cars when they became more common. My dad modernized it, brought in computer diagnostics and all that. He paused. Now it's just me. What happened to the and son part? Dad passed 3 years ago. Heart attack, just like I told you. I keep meaning to change the sign, but he shrugged. Seems like it would be losing something important. There was a sadness in his voice that made me want to reach out to offer comfort somehow. But we barely knew each other, and I wasn't sure what comfort I could possibly offer. I'm sorry, I said instead. Thanks. He was a good man. Would have liked you, I think. The casual way he said it, like it was a given that his father would have approved of me, sent a warm feeling spreading through my chest. Back at the garage, Marcus worked with the same quiet competence I'd observed the night before. He seemed to know exactly what needed to be done and in what order, his movements economical and sure. I watched him work, ostensibly to learn something about car repair, but really just because there was something mesmerizing about watching someone who was truly skilled at their craft. So, what did you do back in the city? He asked while wrestling with a stubborn bolt. Marketing, mostly digital campaigns for companies that sold things people didn't really need. I realized how bitter that sounded and tried to soften it. It paid well, and I was good at it, but it never felt meaningful, I guess. What would feel meaningful? It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding for months. I don't know, I admitted. Something that helped people, maybe. Something that made a difference. Like fixing cars on the side of the road? I looked at him, bent over my engine, solving my problem with skill and generosity, and felt something click into place. Yeah, I said. Like that. He glanced up at me and smiled, and for a moment the air between us seemed to shimmer with possibility again. Hand me that socket wrench, he said. I found the tool and passed it to him, our fingers brushing in the exchange. This time, neither of us pretended it was an accident. The contact lasted a beat longer than necessary, and when he met my eyes, I saw something there that made my pulse race. So, he said, his voice slightly rougher than before, tell me about this relationship that ended. The question was so unexpected, so direct, that I almost didn't answer. But there was something about Marcus, his straightforwardness, his lack of judgment, that made honesty feel possible. His name was David. We were together for 2 years, lived together for 1. He was safe, I guess, predictable. We had this whole life planned out, the apartment in a better neighborhood, the joint bank account, the eventual wedding that would make both our mothers happy. But I was miserable, going through the motions of a life that looked good on paper but felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, and he was miserable too, though he'd never admit it. We were both trying to be people we thought we were supposed to be instead of people we actually were. Marcus nodded like he understood completely. What people did you actually want to be? I'm still figuring that out. I paused. What about you? Ever been married? Serious relationships? He was quiet for a long moment, focused intently on the alternator he was removing. A few relationships, nothing that stuck. He glanced up at me. Turns out it's hard to find someone who understands why you'd want to stay in a place like this when you could live anywhere else. Maybe you were looking for the wrong kind of person. Maybe. He set the old alternator aside and reached for the new one. Or maybe I wasn't looking hard enough. There was something in the way he said it, something in the way he was looking at me, that made the temperature in the garage seem to rise several degrees. I cleared my throat. Need any help with that? Actually, yeah. Could you hold this steady while I get the bolts started? I moved closer, close enough to smell the clean scent of his shampoo mixing with the honest smell of his work. Our bodies were almost touching as I held the alternator in place, and I was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from his skin, the controlled strength in his movements. That's perfect, he said softly, and I wasn't entirely sure he was talking about the alternator. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, passing tools back and forth, our hands touching frequently now, each contact sending little sparks of electricity through me. The sexual tension was becoming impossible to ignore, but it felt different from anything I'd experienced before. Not urgent or demanding, but patient and deep, like something that had been building for longer than the 18 hours we'd known each other. There, Marcus said finally, tightening the last bolt. That should do it. Want to try starting her up? I got behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine turned over immediately, running smooth and quiet. Perfect, I said, and I could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice. I got out of the car and we stood there for a moment, both of us aware that the reason for our connection, my mechanical crisis, had been resolved. I was mobile again. I could get back on the road, continue my aimless journey west, leave this place and this man behind. So, Marcus said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Ready for that tour I promised? Relief flooded through me. Absolutely. He locked up the garage and we got into his truck, the radio tuning to a country station that was playing something slow and melancholy. As we drove through the surrounding countryside, Marcus pointed out local landmarks. The swimming hole where he'd learned to swim, the hill where teenagers went to park and look at the stars, the old farmhouse where his grandparents had lived. It's beautiful, I said, and meant it. There was something about this landscape that spoke to a part of me I'd forgotten existed. The wide-open spaces, the sense of continuity and tradition, the way everything seemed to fit together in a pattern that had been generations in the making. Most people from the city think it's boring, Marcus said. Most people from the city don't know how to be still long enough to see what's here. He looked over at me, something shifting in his expression. And you do? I'm learning. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the countryside rolling past the windows. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months, maybe years. There was no agenda here, no schedule to keep, no expectations to meet. Just this moment, this place, this man who had appeared in my life like something out of a dream. There's something I want to show you, Marcus said, turning onto a dirt road that led up through a stand of trees. The road ended at a small clearing on top of a hill that overlooked the valley below. Marcus parked and we got out, walking to the edge of the clearing where a weathered wooden bench sat facing the view. This is where I come when I need to think, he said. The view was spectacular, rolling farmland stretching to the horizon, broken up by winding creeks and patches of forest. In the distance, a red barn sat nestled among fields of corn and soybeans. It looked like something from a postcard, but it was real, solid, permanent in a way that felt foreign to someone who'd spent years in a world of constant change and upheaval. How often do you come up here? I asked. More often lately. He sat down on the bench and I joined him, our shoulders almost touching. Since Dad died, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what comes next. And what have you decided? That's the problem. I can't seem to decide anything. He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the valley. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I don't know which way to go. I understood that feeling completely, the sense of being suspended between possibilities, waiting for something to point you in the right direction. Maybe you don't have to decide right now, I said. Maybe some things work themselves out in their own time. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. Maybe they do, he said quietly. We sat in comfortable silence watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. A red-winged blackbird called from somewhere in the trees behind us, and the air smelled like honeysuckle and fresh grass. I felt more at peace than I had in months, but underneath that peace was something else, an awareness, an anticipation, like the feeling you get before a thunderstorm when the air becomes electric and full of possibility. I should probably ask, Marcus said eventually. Are you gay? The question was so direct, so matter of fact, that it took me a moment to process it. In the city, that conversation usually involved weeks of careful hints and tentative explorations. But Marcus had just asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yes, I said, and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. He nodded like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. Good to know. What about you? Same, he smiled. Though around here, it's not exactly something you advertise on a billboard. Is that hard, living in a small town, being different? Sometimes, but most people around here have known me since I was a kid. They care more about whether you're a good neighbor than who you sleep with. He paused. Still, it can be lonely, not a lot of options for companionship. The way he said it, with such quiet matter-of-factness, made my heart ache for him. I thought about the city, with its gay bars and dating apps and endless possibilities for connection, and tried to imagine what it would be like to live somewhere like this, where you might be the only openly gay person for miles around. That sounds isolating, I said. It is, but there are compensations. This place, this community, it's worth something. People don't just disappear here. They don't ghost you or move across the country without saying goodbye. When someone says they'll be there for you, they mean it. I thought about David, about all my city friends who had faded away after the breakup, about the shallow relationships built on convenience and proximity rather than genuine connection. I can't remember the last time someone meant it when they said that to me, I admitted. Marcus turned to look at me fully, his expression serious. That's a shame. You seem like someone worth staying for. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they were exactly what I needed to hear and hadn't even known it. When was the last time someone had seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth their time and attention? Thank you, I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. For what? For seeing something worth staying for. We looked at each other for a long moment, the air between us thick with unspoken possibility. I felt like we were standing at the edge of something significant, something that could change both our lives if we were brave enough to step forward. But then a truck rumbled past on the road below, its headlights sweeping across the hillside, and the spell was broken. Marcus cleared his throat and looked back out at the valley. It's getting late, he said. I should probably get you back to your car. I nodded, though part of me wanted to protest, to ask for more time, to suggest we stay here until the sun came up and we'd talk through everything we'd never been able to say to anyone else. The drive back to the garage was quieter than the drive out had been, both of us lost in our own thoughts. But when Marcus parked beside my newly repaired Honda, neither of us made a move to get out of the truck. So, he said finally, what's the plan? Back on the road? It was the question I'd been dreading because I still didn't have an answer. This morning, the plan had been simple. Get the car fixed and continue west, continue running from a life that hadn't been working. But now, sitting here with this man who had appeared in my life like some kind of answer to a prayer I hadn't known I was praying, the plan seemed less clear. I don't know, I said honestly. I was just driving, trying to figure things out. I don't actually have anywhere I need to be. That sounds like freedom. It sounds like being lost. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering that. Maybe being lost isn't the worst thing. Maybe it's just the step before being found. I looked at him in the dim light of the truck's cab, this man who fixed things for a living, who had stopped to help a stranger, who seemed to see possibilities where I saw only confusion. What are you suggesting? I asked. I'm not suggesting anything, just thinking out loud. He paused. But if you wanted to stick around for a day or two, figure things out, well, there are worse places to do that. My heart jumped at the possibility. but my practical mind immediately started listing objections. What would I do here? Where would I stay? What was the point of delaying the inevitable return to reality? But then I thought about the peace I'd felt on that hilltop, the way Marcus had seen something in me worth staying for, the possibility that maybe I didn't have to keep running from everything that wasn't working in my life. Maybe I could stop running towards something instead. The motel has reasonable weekly rates, Marcus said, as if reading my thoughts. And Mrs. Patterson makes those pancakes every morning. Are you trying to bribe me with breakfast food? Is it working? I laughed and realized it was the first time I'd genuinely laughed in weeks. Maybe a little. There's a diner in town that's looking for part-time help. Nothing glamorous, but it would give you something to do while you figure things out, and he hesitated. I wouldn't mind the company. The admission was so honest, so vulnerable that it took my breath away. Here was this man who barely knew me, offering me a place in his life, his community, his world. It should have felt presumptuous or overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. I don't want to impose, I said. You wouldn't be. Hell, you'd be doing me a favor. Like I said, it gets lonely out here. I looked out at my car, repaired and ready to take me wherever I wanted to go. Then I looked back at Marcus, who was watching me with an expression of hopeful uncertainty. 1 week, I heard myself say, just to see how it feels. His face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire county. Yeah, really? Really, but I'm paying my own way. Motel, meals, everything. Deal. He stuck out his hand for me to shake, and when our palms touched, that electric current ran between us again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. So, I said, still holding his hand, what do people do for fun around here? Depends on what you consider fun. There's fishing, hiking, a movie theater that shows films about 6 months after they come out in the city. Saturday nights, there's usually a crowd at Murphy's Bar. Nothing fancy, but decent beer and good music. Sounds perfect. And there's always something that needs fixing around town. Mrs. Henderson's porch has been sagging for months, and the community center could use a fresh coat of paint. The idea of staying in one place long enough to contribute to it, to be part of something larger than my own confused existence, was both foreign and deeply appealing. I'd like that, I said, being useful. Good, because tomorrow's Saturday and I promised I'd help set up for the farmer's market. Could use an extra pair of hands. Consider them yours. We finally let go of each other's hands, but the warmth lingered. Marcus started the truck and drove me back to the motel where Mrs. Patterson was more than happy to arrange for a weekly rate and assure me that I was welcome to stay as long as I needed. As Marcus walked me to my room, I felt a nervous energy building between us. The night air was cool and still, full of the scent of honeysuckle and the distant sound of nightbirds. Everything felt heightened, significant, like we were characters in a story that was just beginning. Thank you, I said when we reached my door. For everything. The car, the tour, the job lead. I don't know why you're being so kind to a stranger, but I'm grateful. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the gravel of the parking lot. I don't usually stop for people, he said finally. When I see someone broken down on the side of the road, I usually figure someone else will come along, someone better equipped to help. But last night, something told me I should stop. Something told me you were different. Different how? He looked up at me, and in the light spilling from my motel room window, his eyes were dark and serious. Like maybe you were exactly what I'd been looking for, without knowing I was looking. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and promise. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at something that could be either salvation or destruction, and I had no way of knowing which until I jumped. I'm glad you stopped, I said quietly. So am I. We stood there for another moment, neither of us quite ready to say goodnight, both of us aware that something significant was beginning, but unsure how to acknowledge it. Finally, Marcus took a step back. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. What time should I be ready? I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. I think I can manage that. He turned to go, then stopped and looked back at me. Jamie, I'm really glad your car broke down. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness beyond the motel's parking lot lights. Then I went inside and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what had just happened to my life. 24 hours ago, I had been Jamie Collins, drifting through life without purpose or direction. Now I was Jamie Collins, planning to spend a week in a place I'd never heard of, working alongside a man I'd just met, trying to figure out if the connection I felt was real or just the product of loneliness and circumstance. But as I got ready for bed, I realized I felt more hopeful than I had in months. For the first time since the breakup with David, since quitting my job, since acknowledging that my carefully planned life wasn't making me happy, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from it. I fell asleep thinking about calloused hands and kind eyes, about farmers markets and community projects, about the possibility that sometimes getting lost was just the first step toward being found. Part 2, the morning came too soon and not soon enough. I'd lain awake for hours after Marcus left, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. What was I doing? Was I making a mistake by staying? What did I actually know about this man who had so quickly become the center of my temporarily derailed life? But when I woke to the sound of his truck pulling into the motel parking lot at exactly 8 o'clock, all those doubts seemed less important than the flutter of anticipation in my stomach. Marcus was leaning against the driver's side door when I emerged from my room, wearing jeans that had seen honest work and a faded t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders in a way that made my mouth go dry. His hair was still damp from a recent shower, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee from what looked like a gas station. "Morning," he said, offering me one of the cups. "Figured you might need caffeine before we put you to work." The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what I needed. What exactly am I volunteering for? Setting up the farmers market, mostly just moving tables and chairs, helping vendors get their booths organized, nothing too strenuous. He opened the passenger door for me, a gesture so natural and unassuming that it took me a moment to appreciate how rare such courtesies had become in my city life. The drive into town was short, just a few miles down roads that were already familiar from yesterday's tour. In daylight, the landscape looked even more welcoming. Fields of corn and soybeans stretching toward distant farmhouses, cattle grazing in pastures dotted with oak trees, everything green and growing and alive. "Tell me about this farmers market," I said. "Started about 10 years ago when a bunch of local farmers decided they wanted to sell directly to consumers instead of going through the big grocery chains. Now it's become kind of a community event. Live music, local crafts, Mrs. Patterson's famous blueberry pancakes." He glanced over at me. "You'll like it. Very different from city farmers markets." "How so?" "Less pretentious, more genuine. People aren't there to be seen buying organic kale for their Instagram posts. They're there because they know the person who grew their tomatoes and they want to support their neighbor." The town square was already bustling with activity when we arrived. Pickup trucks and cars were parked around the perimeter, and people were unloading tables, tents, and boxes of produce. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and the atmosphere was friendly and efficient. Marcus was greeted with waves and shouts from multiple directions. "Marcus, over here, I need help with this canopy." "Hey, Marcus, can you look at my truck later? She's making that noise again." "Marcus, thank God you're here. This table leg is wobbling." "Popular guy," I observed. "Small town," he said with a shrug. "Everyone knows everyone, and if you're handy with tools, you become everyone's go-to person." For the next 2 hours, I helped Marcus move tables, set up canopies, and solve various minor crises that arose during the setup process. It was physical work, but not unpleasant, and I found myself enjoying the sense of shared purpose, the way everyone pitched in without being asked, the casual friendliness of people who had been working together for years. "You must be the young man whose car broke down," said a woman with silver hair and dirt under her fingernails, appearing beside me as I was adjusting a table leg. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. My husband and I run the vegetable stand over there." "Jamie," I said, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you. Marcus told us you might be sticking around for a while. That's wonderful. We can always use extra help around here." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And it's Good to see Marcus with some company. He works too hard and doesn't socialize enough. Before I could figure out how to respond to that, she was gone, bustling off to arrange her display of tomatoes and peppers. Making friends already, Marcus said, appearing at my elbow with another cup of coffee. Mrs. Mitchell seems nice. She is, and she's right. I do work too hard and don't socialize enough, he smiled. Maybe having you around will force me to change that. The market officially opened at 10, and by 10:15 it was crowded with families, elderly couples, young parents pushing strollers, teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but were there because their parents had dragged them along. The atmosphere was festive and relaxed, with bluegrass music playing from speakers near the bandstand and the mingled sense of fresh produce, baked goods, and barbecue filling the air. Hungry? Marcus asked. Betty's Diner has a booth over there, and her breakfast burritos are legendary. We made our way through the crowd, Marcus stopping every few feet to greet someone, to inquire about someone's family, to discuss the weather or crops or local gossip. I watched him navigate these interactions with the easy grace of someone who belonged completely to this place and these people. You're like the mayor or something, I said when we finally reached the food booth. Just been here my whole life. When you've changed someone's oil and fixed their transmission, they tend to remember you fondly. Betty turned out to be a woman in her 50s with laugh lines around her eyes and flour on her apron. Her breakfast burritos were indeed legendary, stuffed with eggs, cheese, bacon, and hash browns, and topped with a green chili sauce that had just enough heat to wake up your taste buds. We found a spot at one of the picnic tables that had been set up near the bandstand, and I settled in to watch the ebb and flow of small-town life. Children ran between the booths, their parents calling after them with the patient exasperation of people who knew their kids were safe here. Elderly men gathered near the hardware booth to discuss local politics and complain about the weather. Teenage couples wandered hand in hand, trying to look sophisticated while sneaking glances at each other. This is nice, I said, and meant it. There was something deeply satisfying about being part of this community, even temporarily, even as an outsider looking in. Different from what you're used to? Very different. In the city, you could live next door to someone for years and never know their name. Here, it seems like everyone knows everyone's entire family history. That's both the blessing and the curse of small-town life, Marcus said. Privacy is pretty much non-existent, but neither is loneliness. When old Mr. Henderson had his heart attack last year, there were casseroles showing up on his doorstep before he even got home from the hospital. I thought about my own life in the city, the way I could go days without having a meaningful conversation with another human being, the way illness or crisis was something you faced alone or with paid professionals. That sounds kind of wonderful, actually. It is most of the time. Marcus paused, his expression growing more serious. Though it can be complicated when you're different, when you don't fit the mold of what people expect. I heard the subtext in his words, the reality of being gay in a small traditional community, the careful balance between belonging and authenticity. Has it been hard? I asked. Being yourself here? Sometimes, especially when I was younger, but people here have known me since I was a kid and they care more about character than orientation. Most of them, anyway, he smiled. And the ones who don't matter, well, they don't matter. A group of children ran past our table, chasing a dog that had escaped from somewhere, their laughter bright and joyful in the morning air. Watching them, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite identify. Nostalgia for a childhood I'd never had, maybe. Or longing for the kind of community where children could run free because everyone was looking out for them. Tell me about growing up here, I said. Marcus leaned back on the picnic table bench, his eyes taking on a distant quality as he remembered. It was good, really good. Riding bikes everywhere, knowing every kid in town, spending summers at the swimming hole or helping my dad in the garage. Friday night football games, church picnics, 4th of July parades. He smiled. Sounds hokey when you say it out loud, but it was real. It was home. When did you know you were different? Pretty early. Maybe 12 or 13. I had a crush on my best friend, Danny Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's nephew, but I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. Just knew I liked being around him more than I liked being around girls. That must have been confusing. Terrifying, more like. This was 15 years ago, remember? Small town, conservative values, no internet to speak of.
Different wasn't always celebrated. How did you figure it out? To terms with it. College mostly. For state university when I was 18, and suddenly I was in a world where being gay wasn't just acceptable. It was celebrated.
Joined the LGBT student union, dated a few guys, learned that there was nothing wrong with me. He paused. But then Dad had his heart attack, and I came back here, and I had to figure out how to be myself in the place where I'd spent so many years hiding. And how did you do that? Slowly, carefully. Started with people I trusted most, Mrs. Patterson, Doc Miller, a few of the farmers I'd grown up with. Turns out most people didn't care as much as I'd feared they would. They cared that I was there for them when their cars broke down, that I was reliable and honest and part of the community. Who I slept with was pretty far down the list of things they worried about. That's amazing, in the best possible way. I got lucky. Not everyone in my situation does. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the market come alive around us. A bluegrass band had set up near the bandstand and was playing songs I didn't recognize but somehow knew anyway. Music that seemed to rise from the earth itself, rooted in tradition and community and the simple pleasure of making something beautiful together. "What about you?" Marcus asked eventually. "When did you know?" "High school. Had a massive crush on my chemistry lab partner, spent the entire semester making excuses to touch his hand when we were handling equipment." I smiled at the memory. Poor guy had no idea why I was so interested in his opinions about molecular structures. "Did you ever tell him?" "God, no. This was suburban Illinois. Not exactly the most progressive place in the world. I kept it to myself until college, then spent 4 years overcompensating by being the gayest person on campus." Marcus laughed. "What does that look like?" "Rainbow everything. Involvement in every LGBTQ organization, dating as many guys as possible to make up for lost time." I paused. Looking back, I think I was performing being gay instead of just being gay, if that makes sense. "Perfect sense. When you've spent years hiding something, it's easy to swing too far in the other direction when you finally feel safe." "Exactly. And then I moved to the city after graduation, and being gay was just normal, unremarkable, which was wonderful but also kind of empty. Like I'd been fighting so hard for the right to be myself that I forgot to figure out who that self actually was." "And now?" I considered the question, looking out at this farmer's market, this community, this man who had appeared in my life at exactly the moment I needed him most. "Now I think I'm finally ready to find out." The band finished their song and launched into something slower, more contemplative. Around us, the crowd had settled into the relaxed rhythm of a Saturday morning, people taking their time, enjoying the sunshine and the company and the simple pleasure of being part of something larger than themselves. "Dance with me," Marcus said suddenly. "Here? Now?" "Why not? It's a farmer's market, not a funeral." He stood and offered me his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. He led me to a small space near the bandstand where a few other couples were swaying to the music, mostly older couples who had been dancing together for decades, their movements comfortable and unhurried. Marcus pulled me close, close enough that I could smell his soap and the lingering scent of motor oil on his clothes, close enough that I could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest. We moved together slowly, barely dancing really, just swaying to the music while the market bustled around us. "People are staring," I said, though I made no move to pull away. "Let them stare. They're probably just jealous that we look so good together." I laughed and relaxed into his arms, letting myself enjoy the simple pleasure of being held by someone who seemed to understand me in ways I was only beginning to understand myself. The music washed over us, and for a few minutes the rest of the world faded away. When the song ended, we stayed in each other's arms for a moment longer than necessary, neither of us quite ready to let go. Finally, Marcus stepped back, his hands lingering on my waist. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and conversations and small tasks that needed doing. I helped Mrs. Mitchell arrange her vegetables, assisted an elderly man in loading his purchases into his car, and listened to more stories about local history and gossip than I could possibly remember. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, curious about the stranger who had appeared in their midst, but not pushy or invasive. By noon, the market was winding down, vendors packing up their unsold goods and folding up their tables. Marcus and I helped with the cleanup, stacking chairs and breaking down canopies, working with the same easy cooperation we'd established the night before. "So," Marcus said as we loaded the last of the tables into his truck, "what did you think? Still interested in sticking around for a few days?" I looked around at the town square, now mostly empty except for a few stragglers and the maintenance crew sweeping up. This morning I had been a stranger here, but now I felt like I belonged, like I was part of something meaningful and good. "More than ever," I said. "Good, because I was thinking if you're really serious about staying for a week, maybe we should get you set up with that job at the diner. Betty mentioned she could use someone to help with the lunch rush." "You think she'd hire me? I don't have any restaurant experience." "She's more interested in work ethic than experience. And after watching you this morning, I think she'd be impressed." "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned against the truck, studying me with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. "You jumped in without being asked. Helped wherever you saw a need. Talked to everyone like they mattered. That's the kind of person Betty wants working for her." His words warmed me in a way that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. When was the last time someone had noticed my character instead of my credentials? "If you think she'd be interested, I'd love to talk to her. I'll set something up for Monday. In the meantime," he opened the truck door. "Want to see more of the area? There are some spots I didn't show you yesterday." The afternoon was warm and golden, perfect for exploring. Marcus drove me through farmland and forest, past hidden lakes and rolling hills, stopping occasionally to point out local landmarks or tell stories about the history of the area. I found myself relaxing more completely than I had in months, letting go of the urban tension that had become so much a part of me I'd forgotten it was there. We ended up at another hilltop, this one with a small cemetery that overlooked the valley. The headstones were old, some dating back to the 1800s, and they told the story of the families who had settled this land and made it their own. "My great-great-grandfather is buried here," Marcus said, leading me to a weathered stone near the edge of the hill. "Came here from Ireland in 1847, bought 100 acres and started farming. His son opened the garage in 1923. 4 generations in the same place. That's incredible." It's something, all right. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be the generation that leaves, that goes somewhere else and starts over. Is that something you want? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on his ancestor's headstone. I used to think so. When I was younger, I felt trapped here, like I was living someone else's life instead of my own. But now, he looked out over the valley, at the farms and forests and small towns scattered across the landscape. Now I think maybe I was born to be here. Maybe this is where I can do the most good. And if it gets lonely? He turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression that made my heart skip a beat. Maybe it won't always be lonely. We stood there in the cemetery, surrounded by the history of this place, and I felt something shift between us. The careful friendship we'd been building was deepening into something more complex, more dangerous, more full of possibility. Marcus, I started to say, but he shook his head. I know, it's too fast, too soon. We barely know each other. That's not what I was going to say. What then? I took a step closer to him, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that the space between us felt electric and full of promise. I was going to say that I feel like I've been looking for you my whole life without knowing it. His breath caught, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. The afternoon sun was warm on our faces, and the world was quiet except for the sound of wind through the grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. It felt like a moment outside of time, outside of the careful progression of normal life. But then a car drove past on the road below, its engine loud in the stillness, and we stepped apart, both of us suddenly aware of where we were, how exposed we were, how much we still didn't know about each other. We should head back, Marcus said, his voice rougher than usual. I nodded, though every instinct in my body was telling me to stay, to push past the careful boundaries we'd been maintaining, to find out what would happen if we stopped being so cautious with each other. The drive back to town was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When Marcus pulled up in front of the motel, neither of us made a move to get out of the truck. I had a good time today, I said finally. Me too. Thank you for including me, for making me feel welcome here. Thank you for staying. We looked at each other across the cab of the truck, and I felt that electric tension building between us again. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to ask, but I didn't know how to begin. I should let you go, Marcus said eventually. You've had a long day. I nodded and reached for the door handle, but something made me pause. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really stop last night, when you saw my car broken down? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then he looked out through the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I told you. Something told me I should. That's not really an answer. He sighed and turned to face me. You want the truth? Always. I've been driving that road for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of people broken down over the years, and I've always found some excuse not to stop. Too busy, someone else will help, not my responsibility. He paused. But last night when I saw you sitting there, something about the way you looked, I don't know, lost maybe, or searching for something. It reminded me of how I felt when I came back here after college, like you were at a crossroads and didn't know which way to go. And you wanted to help. I wanted to help, but more than that, I wanted to meet you. There was something about you, even from a distance, that made me curious. Made me think maybe you were someone I needed to know. His honesty took my breath away. In a world of casual connections and surface interactions, here was someone willing to be completely transparent about his motivations, his feelings, his desires. I'm glad you stopped, I said. So am I. We sat in silence for another moment, and I felt like we were balanced on the edge of something significant, like the next words spoken would determine the direction this thing between us would take. I should go, I said finally, though it was the last thing I wanted to do. Yeah, big day tomorrow. Church, if you're interested, then Sunday dinner at the Mitchells. Sarah invited you specifically. She did? Word travels fast in a small town. By now everyone knows you're staying for a week, and they all want to meet the stranger who convinced Marcus Garrett to take a day off. I laughed. Is that really so unusual? Practically unheard of. I got out of the truck and walked around to the driver's side window. Marcus rolled it down and looked up at me, and in the fading light of evening, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Jamie. I turned to walk toward my room, but his voice stopped me. Jamie? I looked back. I'm really glad your car broke down. So am I. I went inside and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. I'd come to this place as a stranger, running from a life that wasn't working, with no plan and no destination. Now I felt more connected to another human being than I had in years, more hopeful about the future than I'd been in months. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought it might be Marcus. But it was David again, asking where I was, whether I was okay when I was coming back. The messages felt like intrusions from another life, another Rar.